Welcome and thanks for joining me for another personal pondering in the Psalms. I'm sure you've often been aware there are some Psalms that just stand out from the crowd. They're particularly well known and particularly loved by God's people. And I think Psalm 51, which is where we are today, deservedly fits into that category. It's a marvellous psalm full of theology and doctrine and truth that gives us vocabulary and understanding, particularly about sin and its nature and the only way it can be dealt with. And so that's what the psalm we're going to look at. It's so massive in its content and importance that we're actually going to take 6 sections, so 6 studies to look at this psalm. You can divide the psalm up into different ways. You can follow the 6 stanzas in most of our English language Bibles. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to group them into 4 headings. So I'm going to group the first 3 sections, 1 through to 9, in one section, which is a prayer. 10 to 12, you have another prayer. 13 to 17, you have a promise. And then 18 to 19, you have another prayer. But let's look in this first study, verses 1 to 2, which, along with the other opening sections here, makes up a prayer for pardon. And in the first 2 verses particularly, David is appealing for mercy from God. That's the foundation of this particular part of David's heart cry. He's appealing to the mercy of God. My friends, that's such an important place to start, isn't it? To remind ourselves that the character of God is the sole ground for hope as we approach him. That the mercy of God is the sole basis for any approach to God. We have nothing else we can claim, nothing else we can offer to God. All we can do is bring our sin and lay ourselves at his feet and cry out for his mercy. And I find that often, even as Christians, we don't really understand what sin is. We don't talk about it in its honest way, and we dress it up in all sorts of unhelpful and unbiblical ways. David does none of that. That's what makes this psalm so refreshingly honest. In the first 2 verses which we're looking at today, I want you to notice that he expresses 3 different needs of forgiveness and then 3 grounds for forgiveness. So first of all, 3 needs for forgiveness. There are, I think, 8 different words in the Old Testament which are used to speak about sin. 3 of them are found in these first 2 verses and repeated again in verses 3 to 6. Let's look at these 3 words. You have to be familiar with them in English. The end of verse 1, he speaks about my transgressions. The word there means my lawlessness, my refusal to submit myself to a justified authority. He speaks about, halfway through verse 2, my iniquity. The word there means the inner character of sin, my natural deviation, my natural tendency towards sin. And then he uses the word sin at the end of verse 2, the most frequently used word in the Old Testament, which speaks about missing the mark, missing the right mark that God has set, falling short of a standard that God has set for us. So David doesn't dress up sin. He doesn't argue it away or belittle it with some platitudinous words. He names sin for what it is. And that's where we've got to begin. We come to God. As we appeal to his mercy, we've got to be upfront and open with the nature of our sin. It's our refusal to accept the authority of God. It's our inner twisted, deviated nature. It's our failure to live up to the standard that God has set for us. So those are the grounds on which David makes his appeal. Those are the needs that he expressed. Then he bases his appeal on these 3 grounds. Look at them. Verse 1, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Most English translations don't really helpfully bring out the fact that in the mercy in 1 and the end of verse 1 are actually 2 different Hebrew words. And I think I would prefer to translate the second one of those as pity. The first one we might use compassion, if you like, or have mercy. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your compassion, your abundant compassion. And that's how David appeals to God. The steadfast love is God's covenantal faithfulness. The abundant mercy is the compassion and pity of God to a helpless creature who can do nothing to help himself. And so David comes to God, not hiding his sin, not justifying it anyway, but putting it on the table and saying, God, I need your mercy. There's another interesting dimension to this that may help us as we think about this today. Under the old Mosaic law, in all the things that God provided and prescribed for the people to obtain forgiveness, there was no forgiveness made possible for the 2 great sins of which David above all else is guilty: adultery and murder. But for those two sins, as well as all the others, David appeals to the covenant mercy and love of God, based on the character of God, and is confident, as we'll see later in the psalm, that he will be forgiven. He will be heard by God. Join me again for another look at this amazing psalm. The Lord bless you.